Welcome to the Wicked Podcast, where we read the business books you don't have the time for. I'm Marcus Kirsch.
And I'm Troy Norcross.
And we are your co-hosts for the Wicked Podcast.
Hello everyone. Today we're talking to Jacques van Niekerk, who is the ex-CEO of Wundermann Data. He had sold his business to Wundermann, and he since then joined a new business called Edison as a COO, whilst he's also an investor in startups like Guild. Super interesting guy, a lot about data, about specialists, what it takes to create teams that can run a data-driven business, and he's an overall very nice guy. So I had the pleasure to talk to him about lots and lots of different things, and I hope you enjoy it as much as I did.
Before the interview, a quick word from our very first sponsor, Zencastr. We use Zencastr for all our audio and video recording, and it's a very nifty tool that splits up all the channels for very easy editing. Zencastr is used by 10% of all active podcasts. You can get 40% off the first 3 months and unlimited audio and video recordings with our special coupon code WICKEDPODCAST. I repeat, Wicked Podcast for 40% off. And now the interview. Hello everyone. Today we're here with Jacques van Niekerk. I hope I pronounced it right. Hello Jacques, and thank you for being here.
Hi Marcus, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
So please start to tell our listeners who you are and what you do.
So I am the global CEO of a company called Edison, and we are one of the world's largest independent content companies. But as you can imagine, content is a broad category. Our superpower is really in kind of what we'd call original and advanced or premium content in the world of video is really where we ply our trade.
So, and I saw, and we talked earlier when we were just meeting before the recording. So you sold previously a company to WPP, and now you're going back to another company. There's a lot of smaller companies I can see in the technology section in your resume, which is very impressive. So technology and marketing. So you have a lot of experience with looking at different bits and pieces, and something like Guild, for example, which I think I've downloaded once as well and I've been using. Tell us a little bit what you see in terms of the dynamic of tech and the industry you're working in.
Yeah, I think technology is an incredible enabler, as you know, of new ways of working. And I'm always kind of intrigued about, somewhere in my DNA, there's something that keeps me wanting to make things better and optimize things. I'm maybe a little bit of obsessive compulsive when I see things not working in what I think could be a better way. So my quest is really, how do we work smarter, not harder? How can we be more efficient? How can we be more sustainable? And then the last thing really is differentiation. How do we either improve a category or disrupt the category? That's really the stuff that gets me up in the morning, is this idea of kind of creating things that are better for the people who work there, the clients, kind of society at large. And then I like working in companies where it's good people and strong community. And community is quite broadly amongst the users, the end clients, and the company itself. So that's kind of a little bit how I'm wired.
Okay. And I hear that you now mentioned two things. So obviously, and I have mentioned the technology, and you talked about the right people as well, and working in advertising and marketing. Historically was interesting, and just coming out of a big job over at WPP. David Ogilvy was the one back in the days who banked a lot on science and technology and said this is going to bring advertising further. Interestingly, at the same time, Bill Bernbach went a bit the other way, and he built the first creative team. So he actually built a cross-disciplinary team of a copywriter and an art director who would normally not directly work together, and changed advertising forever, as we know. So we covered the ogilvy technology side. So how do you feel then about modern teams and modern campaign or work building around content creation, let's say, in
Mm.
teams, and how that dynamic then works in combination with the technology you mentioned?
Yeah, that's a great question, and it's kind of strange. It's almost like the more things change, the more they stay the same at some level, right, Marcus? But I think what really drew me to
Yeah.
Edison, where I am now, is the last few years I've maybe over-indexed a lot on the martech, ad tech, data side. And it's almost like the mid journey to the last mile is almost where the whole industry has been obsessed at, like metrics driven, performance driven, micro targeting, high end personalization at scale. A lot in data. Is it third party, first party data? And those things are all good and they're very science based. And, when we, as I think as a practice, the practice of marketing has become so much more behavioral sciences led as well, and that's fantastic. And advances in kind of data and machine learning and AI, which I'm sure we'll talk a lot about, is a great opportunity. There's some real threats with that, but what struck me, if you think about those people you've mentioned before, whether it was Bernbach or Ogilvy, they were innovating with what was available to them at that point in time in the world. And if you look at the world right now, we have this kind of super intelligence explosion of just information flow that started with the internet, and now we're in the next wave of kind of large scale application of AI everywhere. So I think as an industry, it's almost the best time to be here because we can innovate in the same way that a Bernbach did or an Ogilvy did, but we need to do it in new ways. And I feel that it's really there's going to be a premium on original thinking now. There's going to be a premium on creativity now because for a while it's actually become commoditized. It's like, oh, just give me content at scale, give it to me cheap, give it to me quick, cheap, fast, everywhere. And I think
Yeah.
there's a place for that, but that is a commodity now. But what's going to be a premium now is the high end, really original concepts and ideas, and it's going to take many different forms. It could be somebody in the marketing sector who's innovative because of their operating model, or it could be somebody who's innovative because they are just the most amazing storytellers, or it could be innovative in the way that a narrative is delivered, whether that's in the metaverse or through virtual reality or combinations of all these things. I think that's kind of what's so exciting about this industry at this particular point in time.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting to say that. So let me dig a little bit into that a bit more, because one of the things I always find is that so you mentioned the automation, and now tools and apps let you do 100 times as much as you could do before. So there's a lot of automation there, and I think you're right. You rightly said this is all commoditized, right? Automation will go commoditized as much as you then say the high end is sort of where it becomes more an enabling factor, which for me then sounds a bit more like maybe the qualitative aspect, whereas the automation is the quantitative aspect. Do you think the segmentation is that simple when you also say about measuring, right? When we want to measure efficiency, we always go for quantitative. It's just often the easy bottom line. But qualitative is normally where it seems there's always the investment, there's the higher margin, there's the nicer story, there's something that it gets more to the emotional side of things, which you often can't really automate, when Apple goes out with the way they do things. There's a lot of qualitative aspects in it, even though it's engineering, but it obviously sits in that area. So do you think this is sort of, is there a balance between it, or do they both have both, or what do you
Mm.
see when I say quantitative and qualitative?
No, I love that question. My previous part of my career working at Wundermann and then the merger of Wundermann and J. Walter Thompson, that was really interesting because Wundermann was really good. Lester Wundermann, a bit like David Ogilvy and Bernbach, was quite an iconic character in his time. And he was kind of the grandfather of database and direct marketing, and he was the first marketer to embrace mainframe computing and use computers. So we had a
Wow.
lot of
Yeah.
quantitative skills. in the agency. But when we merged with J. Walter Thompson, we actually got a lot of the qualitative skills, and we showed up better when we combined those things for clients. So that's just where I had some personal experience. I could see the power of using large volumes of data to do heavy lift, like give you larger scale understanding of segments and cohorts, and you could do things like predictive modeling and propensity modeling. But that only got you to a point. To really break through, to make the maximum impact, to drive conversion or change behavior, the quant data is not really going to help you do that. What you really then need is the
Wow.
qualitative insights, the real understanding, the human touch. And there's this interesting thing about data is not a fixed thing. It's kind of, data. One of my colleagues used to say data is basically people disguised in information, right? So if we understand people,
Yeah.
you do need that qualitative understanding of kind of people, their emotions, their, more importantly, actually their values and their motivations. And I think that is a unique skill. And some people have it intuitively. They can do it well and create companies that trade on that. But the problem is that's often around the cult of a personality or somebody who just is really good at it. But I think there are more interesting ways that one can have those kind of qualitative insights and drive better kind of creative solutions by using both quant and qual together.
Yeah. No, it's interesting because I remember years ago when I was agency side, there was when digital became a bigger thing. There was all of that exactly that discussion. It's like, oh, will the tech do all the stuff, and will it be replacing creators? And then they say, oh no, that will never happen. Early days of that discussion where it was really black and white.
Mm.
And I find it interesting. I just had one in the project that came out of where all they were asking people to do in a service was to move their data onto a OneDrive, duplicate it to do something with the laptop. They were like, "Oh, we just explain it to people, and then they'll do it." And I was like, "No, people are afraid. There's a lot of emotion involved in people when you ask them to put their data somewhere that they work with every day, right? So the absence of that is sometimes quite striking. That this is not perceived as value. So when you say in advertising campaigns, all these beautiful emotional ideas that really struck, and here in the UK, famously, we have always the John Lewis adverts that allegedly make everyone cry and everyone go buy a ton of stuff, right?
Yeah.
Famous every year. And on the other side as well, when you look at an area and there's the qualitative aspect, you really actually understand the problem better. You understand the why a bit better, not just the what.
Mm.
Why do you think it's then still so hard to either put a number or the value being perceived that the qualitative aspect represents, especially if there's a whole industry built around it in
Yeah.
theory?
Yeah. 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 Well, there's a lot to unpack there. So let me start at the first place. I
Oh,
think if you look at that John Lewis example, I was fortunate to live in the UK for a while, so I was personally exposed to some of those. I think that is, again, it's just beautiful storytelling at the right point in time that strikes a chord with people. There's a real place for that. But I think what's happened is, and it's happening right now in front of our very own eyes, is the nature of storytelling is changing. And I think we haven't seen a change in behavior of people and society as much as we have in the last few years because of the pandemic, because of the world we live in, because of changes in geopolitics, you know, and a lot of that's driven by information, and whether that's fake news, real news, how things are spreading. But because of that, our understanding of what is a true story, what is a good story, how we want to experience stories have changed dramatically. I think we're only starting to realize that as practitioners in the world of marketing. So I think a lot of people are quite weary of content that just comes at them, pushing information at them. I think there's a lot of skepticism. But if it's a company or a person or a brand they trust that comes and tells them an endearing narrative or endearing story that adds value to their lives, I think they pay attention. We just haven't quite found the metrics to measure that. Now, there's a lot of studies that show how brand building brands an equity in a brand actually improves share price and all those things. But that's just one metric. Not all companies are public. Share price alone is not the true the true barometer. And then I think to your last point, having done a lot of work where we look at performance data for clients, whether we're building predictive models and looking at kind of conversion and churn and retention rates and trying to get to things like customer lifetime value, the one thing that I've almost always seen is it stands in those words: customer lifetime and value. The problem is most people just try and measure it this quarter, this month, because they get given sales targets. So there's a lot of short-term myopic thinking. When you really think about what is the lifetime value, then the way you could build a brand, you can take your time to tell the story with your key constituents and your community. And I think companies who've managed to do that consistently are still the brands that are around 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 80, 100 years out. Are those people who know how to build stories and add value to their constituents. But there's not enough finance books or CFOs or people on Wall Street who care about those metrics because it's all short-term driven. So I think a short answer to your question is we're using short-term metrics to try and measure something that is about building endearing relationships over time through storytelling.
That's interesting. And I think, especially when I look at the big organizations, even so they would probably have the money over years to spend on consistently build things, they still end up doing this quarterly disruption where you can't show anything within 3 months. It sort of gets quickly discarded. So
Yeah.
if we're looking then at the bigger organizations, and we know that there's a lot of new tooling out there, there's lots of new fascinating things to do. Do you think the really bigger companies are still fit to do that, to react quick enough, or what do you have any idea around that strategy? Is it more that what, the small ones will just do it and you just dock on and you sell them to them
Yeah.
and hopefully they survive after you sold them there, or is it that actually these big companies can do that themselves, even so they have this very quarterly thing where everything new gets often quickly discarded and not a chance to be measured, and the old stuff just sticks around forever?
Yeah, my thinking on this has progressed a lot over the last few years. Early on, I was all about kind of be small, move fast, disrupt. You can only innovate when you're a smaller, more entrepreneurial business. I still believe that, but where my thinking's actually progressed is sometimes companies with scale, they might call it innovation, but actually what they're doing is driving change, and we need both.
Yeah.
Let me qualify that for you a little bit. You need innovation to, as I said, the things that I realized that gets me up in the morning. Innovation is about making things better immediately by trying to create something new category, or disrupting and kind of changing a sector to act in a different way. But large companies, through their scale, can drive change that actually impacts society in very positive ways too. So, all it takes is somebody like Walmart to say, we will no longer work with anybody who doesn't deliver any of their logistics in a carbon neutral way, or we will no longer accept certain things. And then the ripple effect of that change that they're driving is actually important to the world. So, I think we need both. We need the kind of innovation that often happens at a smaller company scale, but then we also need the kind of the change and the network effects that larger corporations can bring to the table.
Hmm. Yeah, it's interesting. I think I want to go a little bit back instead of follow that up directly. I want to go a little bit back to one we had before, because when you earlier said about there's a new way of storytelling and it's different
Mm.
how we can do these things now and how we're able to do this. Um, if you look at some of the more recent shifts in storytelling or narratives and how they reach us in terms of influencers and Donald Trump and Elon Musk and their influence on all of that, And I think I read some statistics somewhere that sort of the big news pieces that come to us, or the stuff that actually trickles through, is just created by about 12% of Twitter conversation. So but they have 50% of coverage or something like that. So it's a disproportionate
Mm.
visibility, which is probably not. It's probably normal because the algorithms drive the traffic and rate them high. Um, but how is that then? How does that then make the lives of organizations who are on the content production or storytelling side easier or harder to either compete with that or play a role anywhere
Yeah.
in there?
Yeah, I think the world of there's a world of creating content and creating meaningful content or entertaining content, but there's also, I think, what you're referring to is really what we're seeing as changes in distribution of content. And for a while, if you think of things like you know the printing press was very quickly from lots of small press companies, small regional press became national, and then big printing groups happened. And then you had,
Mm.
the birth of broadcasting, which was quite fragmented. And then you had these big broadcast groups. And for a long time, broadcasting was dominated by these groups. And then cable happened. And there's always this kind of fragmentation, centralization going on. And I think what we're seeing now with the internet, there was actually a lot of fragmentation, but now we've got a couple of big winners, and it's massively centralized again. And then the distribution of content now has perceived to have user generated content, and that analogy of ants with microphones, but an ant with a microphone still being kind of outheard by a gorilla with a megaphone, right? And I think you're referring to a couple of gorillas with
Yeah,
megaphones, and I think we've had that through the history of the media industry. It kind of grows. People want it to kind of be more richer and more interesting, and then it kind of there's a whole ecosystem and an economy that sprouts up, and then it consolidates again. And I think we're in that right now. And sometimes these things change because of kind of laws around kind of centralization, and kind of it comes political, and I think we're seeing that play out. But I think if I take it away from the world of what is an Elon doing with Twitter, or how Trump uses that and for their own agendas, I still think this idea of communities around content is really interesting. I'll give you a recent example. One of our clients is Netflix, and we do a lot of work for them. And what I find so fascinating, and Netflix is really at the vanguard of showing this to the world right now, without sounding too esoteric about it, but how content from different cultures, which in the past you never would have maybe sold and syndicated to another country or to somebody else, actually can travel. And in a world where there's like this perceived rise of nationalism, right? You look at what Netflix is pulling off with something like Squid Games from Korea, which has become like a cultural phenomenon
yeah,
everywhere. And now on Netflix you can see things from all
yeah,
over the world, and it's your choice whether you want to. But they're building these very interesting kind of cross-border cultural communities around storytelling, and I think that's absolutely fascinating.
yeah,
I think we should cherish that more than some influencer with a megaphone trying to push their political agenda. I think there's some beautiful things happening in the world of content, and I think streaming
yeah,
streaming has given us so much access to more content that I think as a consumer of entertainment, that's interesting. And if you think of a lot
yeah,
of
yeah,
the gaming industry, and even how live streaming has taken us into this whole new world of kind of communities, I think that's kind of going to be the next wave of kind of the growth of content and communities around content. And I think for companies and brands who want to grow relationships with their constituents, I think this idea of not pushing information at people to try and sell products to them, but to tell your story, I think is going to be where it's at. If you think about Patagonia, a brand that's so true to a clothing brand that's so true to what they do, but they get there by beautiful storytelling. They'll pick up a cause that they really care about, and next thing there's a fantastic documentary about it, or it could be about one of the athletes who they're sponsoring and the story
yeah,
behind the people. So they do it through grand storytelling, and I think we're seeing that whether it's Netflix or Patagonia or companies like Lego, they do a great job with storytelling. I think that's kind of what's very
Yeah.
interesting for me right now. The world of those influencers. It's hard when you become the product. It's like, I think it's a bit of a gilded cage for those people.
Yeah, it feels very short-lived. And as much as I think you're absolutely right, and it's funny because I don't even realize it. Maybe because of my, design and creative background. I've been used to watching sort of art cinema for times in my life more often, but probably that's not true for the average person. So I think all that
Yeah, yeah.
diversity
It's
in
almost that idea
culture,
in the past in
content, I
cinema you
think
had
is a
to
great
really
thing. As
stick
much,
out. Yeah, sorry. Yeah.
yeah. You only saw them
No,
like in
you're right,
tiny little
Marcus. In the
cinemas
past you
if
had
you're
to really.
lucky and if you were art students, maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. But we have all
As
these
much
like
as I saw an
micro
interview
groups
with
and
one of the Yeah, I saw one of the. I think it's a bit of a delay. That's okay. I saw one of the interviews with one of the actors from Squid Game, interviewed I think by someone in the US, and they were like, "Oh, how do you feel that you're now so have all this fame with this Squid Game?" He's like, "I've been an actor for 20 years in Korea. I've been famous there for a long time, so there's still some kind of gap there that's obviously existing." But yeah,
yeah.
it's a really really great thought. But to look at then that kind of creative work, so that just got me thinking of when we talk about so all the way from technology, we had these things like agile and lean coming up in these startups and working in a particular
Mm,
pace and way. If you look at all the creative and
mm,
the design part, and I've seen it in projects as well, where we try to be more agile and bring these different ways of working in. Often, creative people and design people have a very problematic. They don't quite feel comfortable with that approach because they have different dynamics, different paces, the way they go about things. So do you think how do you think this sort of fits better together? Does it, or will it cause more problem? Or do you think we will still have different specialists that do things in different ways, or will it sort of merge more together? Because we got all these things, agile design thinking, service design, lean, enterprise.
yeah.
It's a
Yeah.
mix. Will the teams gel together, or will we need still specialist teams that then take something away and
Yeah.
bring it back when it's done?
Yeah, gosh, I wish I had a silver bullet answer for you on that. I can tell you what we're experiencing in the company I'm at the moment. We have our own technology platform where we do all the asset management, and we do a lot of kind of adaptation at
Yeah,
scale and annotation through smart use of technology. And then obviously we're capturing all the metadata and doing all that good stuff. And that team, and a lot of AI on top of it. And that team runs an incredibly well organized, agile way. Then I have teams who would do special effects and audio engineering and editing and the producers. And you're right, they work in a slightly different way. And what we're trying to do is bring a more programmatic way of working. So agile product and platform development and a programmatic way to then interface with the platforms, with our clients. Um, and I think we have to, for us, we're trying to do it in more of a client-centric way so that our end customers, who could be studios, streaming companies, brands, agencies, it's quite a different cohort. So we could face off to them in a way that works for them. Because I think it's often we try and force different ways onto each other in the ecosystem. So we talk a lot about just building a smart ecosystem in a way that works best for the people. And it's often getting into boring things like workflow. Like, what is the optimal workflow
yeah,
to get this to work? But I don't want to kind of defer the question, but I think it's almost like every company needs to find their way, but to really lean into what is the best way to do this. There's often this often, I think, as a senior leader, there's often this trap of wanting to centralize things and then decentralize them, and you get this concertina effect happening, and you go, okay, let's be more agile, and then that leads to some form of integration and centralization. Then you
yeah,
realize, oh my gosh, we've lost so much of the goodness and the innovation that happened at the ground level. Let's decentralize again. And I've been through that kind of concertina
yeah.
effect, clients and companies. And I think it's not to over index on one of those two things. I think it's really about saying what works for my company at this point in time and our constituents, knowing that it will keep changing. I think the thing that I try and fight against the most is a organizational design that's fixed. What's more important is kind of an organizational design that allows you to kind of stay kind of adaptable is the key thing. I'm scared of using the word agile because, as you know, it's in its own way. An agile way is almost too rigid sometimes. But
Yeah.
yeah, I hope that makes sense, Marcus.
Oh, perfectly. And I think, I think what everyone observes, that's why I asked the question, because there's at least two different extremes and there's a lot of things in the middle. And if you put people together, you will always get never a clear answer. And I think, and what you said as well, what I found with, I like to talk a bit about team ops and things, but, I found a lot that principles seem to be work better than rigid systems and models, because the work that's out there is just too diverse. You cannot have one process that works for everyone, or even from team to team. So I think there's some interesting, more flexible thinking out there, and often I end up talking with people about principles rather than the actual things to do. As long as the outputs are okay, no one will bother, right?
Yeah.
So, but
And I think there's a lot more
we always
hybrid.
have.
I think there's a
Always
lot
have
more
more.
hybrid thinking, Marcus. Yeah, I think there's a lot more hybrid thinking happening in the world. Both from the way technology is designed, the operating models that goes with it, and I think that's good because it speaks to this. I mean, one thing that I try to do from an organizational design always is to push decision making down the organization. I'm a big believer in that as a principle.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you centralize things too much, you just don't get scale. You get, kind of your decision making is not nearly as good as it is. So I think that's probably my one core principle.
Brilliant, love it. We always have more questions than time, so here's my last one to wrap things up. So, given some of the stuff we talked about, either pick from there or have another thought. So now that you're going over to Edison, or I don't know if you started yet, or you will be there
Yeah.
soon.
I'm day 35.
Well, what do you bring? What do you bring there? Okay. What do you bring there? You reckon? Sort of. What are you excited about bringing to it, or that's already part of it that you're sort of most excited about in this particular company, if you're allowed to talk about it?
No, I am, Marcus. Yeah, and it's, as I said, it's day 35. It took a while to obviously join the team, so I feel like I've maybe more like 65, 70 days that I've been working with the team. But what I love about the team is just the absolute mastery and the artistry that the team has. And I think in a world where there's kind of a commoditization effect and anything to do with production and content, to help this team really adopt kind of things like generative AI that could be seen as, oh, it's going to disrupt and commoditize creativity. I think it's absolutely the opposite. I think generative AI and those kind of things are going to take the mechanical load off the true artists and the true creative people to do better work, to do innovative storytelling. So I'm excited about being part of Edison and being part of that journey with this team, and to figure out new operational design and organizing principles to make that happen. That's really what's getting me up in the morning. And then I'm very fortunate in that I have the experience of being part of an entrepreneurial team who built a company from scratch, grew it globally, sold it, and then stayed. And then I was part of turning around a bigger business and then merging two really big businesses, part of a public company, all in the kind of marketing space. So I think I understand, what it is to be small, but also what it is to work with bigger companies and in a bigger construct. So just that personal experience will hopefully benefit the team at Edison.
Wonderful. Well, it all sounds very impressive, and I'm sure uh, everyone will. If it's if the work there is anything like the conversation we just had, then I'm sure it's a wonderful place to work.
You
So
took
thank you so much, Jack. Thank you for your time, and thank you for being with me today.
It's my pleasure. Thank you.
You've been listening to The Wicked Podcast with co-host Marcus Kirsch and me, Troy Norcross.
Please subscribe on Podomatic, iTunes, or Spotify. You can find all relevant links in the show notes. Please tell us your thoughts in the comment section, and let us know about any books for future episodes.
You can also get in touch with us directly on Twitter on @WickedandBeyond or @Troy_Norcross. Also, learn more about the Wicked Company book and the Wicked Company project at wickedcompany.com.